His debut novel, The Quantity of Desire by Payson Harris, is a tale of growth and evolution as a young minotaur goes from a life of slavery to one of self-determination, learning along the way how to carve his own path in the world with the help and influence of the people he meets. Set in a world of his own creation, the presence of magic and mythical beings is a common appearance. I would characterize it as a mythological fantasy. The protagonist is a minotaur named Chase, sold into slavery at the beginning of the book. Given a choice between the rewards of obedience or the punishment of the whip, he chooses the former and settles into a pleasant life with his new owner. I found Chase to be very endearing. Clearly relatively young and experienced, the author does a good job of conveying that through both his words and thoughts. Well-meaning, intelligent, and desiring to please, it's hard not to immediately like him and want to give him a hug. The supporting cast is rounded out by an assortment of interesting characters, most notably John and Delsarin, who I would say are both father figures of a sort to Chase, and Bree and Hyan, who are more contemporaries. I also have to say I think that Hyan is the first non-binary character I've ever run into in literature, so that's also worth noting, and in a small part having inspired me to make one of my own. A young Minotaur slave, separated from his mother, is pressed into the service of a well-meaning businessman. At first relatively content with his circumstances, things soon take a turn when an accident threatens his future, forcing him to find his destiny somewhere else. I had no preconceptions going into this book, despite being in a group chat with the author. Purchasing a copy from Amazon, I started reading it and was immediately interested. The protagonist is just eminently charming, drawing you into his plight right away. There's no pretentiousness or any of the qualities that offset my interest, and it being a furry book, I was eager to read a book featuring a Minotaur. Definitely not something you'd find in a mainstream title. He was a character whose journey I immediately wanted to share. Starting out in an unexpected place, we meet our protagonist being sold into slavery. Certainly not the most auspicious of beginnings, he is told he will be well treated as long as he follows the rules. Educated, well-fed, and allowed to play with young Bree, he finds a relatively comfortable existence in his servitude, with his freedom allowed as long as he carries out his duties and tolerates the gawking of the guests to the house. As one would expect, things go sideways rather quickly, and soon Chase finds himself for the second time in his life thrust out into a world he isn't really prepared to handle. I think that the author did a fantastic job writing Chase and his journey, really coming up with an excellent portrayal of a young, inexperienced Minotaur who only understands what he's learned from others. I'm reminded of the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child," which really applies in this case, as we see how much every character in the story has had an effect on Chase, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. It executes quite expertly the notion that we are all the sum of our experiences, and that the people who we spend the most time with will influence who we are, either through our choices or our tacit endorsement of their behaviors. The story goes from setting to setting very organically, with the pacing feeling very smooth and natural, and the plot fits together remarkably well, almost to the point of being surprising that this is their first effort. Upon review, there were only two things I found to be worth commenting upon in terms of improvement, and the first was a single line towards the end of the book, which I won't state here specifically, but I found it confusing to me to parse what Chase was saying when trying to plead his case against the antagonist. But I was able to understand the context of the scene, so it wasn't a huge obstacle. The second issue was that during the fight scenes, especially at the end of the book, there was a high frequency of the use of the words to describe the book's foot soldiers, with the same word being used a little too often in some paragraphs, to the point that I would say it was a little repetitive. Other than those 2 points, it was an excellent read and a great story. I highly recommend it to fans of fantasy or furry fiction.
Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!